We're live. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the study session of the University City Council meeting to order on Monday, November 25th at 5:30 p.m. Prior to turning the program over to Mr. Rose for the business session this evening, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Hearing none, Mr. Rose.
Honorable Mayor and council members, on October the 11th, 2021, you approved a resolution creating the Housing and Third Ward Revitalization Task Force. You wanted the creation of a strategy for revitalizing the Third Ward to be citizen-driven. I assigned Deputy City Manager Brooke Sharp to the as the staff liaison to the task force, and I would ask that she introduce this item. Ms. Sharp.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. So we started meeting as a task force in June of 2002, and it has been a very lengthy process, one that has had a lot of community engagement. We did bring on a consultant, Yard & Co., which we do have Ed Scherer here to give the presentation tonight. I do want to recognize the members of the task force that are in the audience. We do have our chair here, Byron Price, our vice chair, Christina Dancy. We have Linda Peoples-Jones and Patricia McQueen. And I believe those are all our task force members that are present, and they are here to answer any questions you may have for them or provide any feedback about the process. So with that said, I will turn it over to Ed to go through the plan. I will note that this is the abridged version of the plan that we have up here on the screen, but you all do have a full copy of the plan that was in your packet.
Well, thank you, everyone, for having me on what was a suddenly cold evening on my walk over. I have to say, I've given presentations all across the country. This is by far the most beautiful city hall that I've ever had the privilege of making a presentation in. And I spent a good deal of time at your public library next door, doing a little bit of work, and the renovations are really beautiful. So there's a lot to be proud of in University City that extends to all wards, and we were really privileged to work on this plan. So with that, we are going to go through the plan, just some highlights. I'm going to present it to you. There will be a quiz afterward. No, there will not be a quiz, but we will go through this and try to leave plenty of time for questions later. The purpose of the plan, as we got started, we worked with the task force, who was really instrumental in this process. And we basically wanted to develop a housing plan for the Third Ward that guided equitable growth, both in the short term and for the long term for the neighborhood residents. But more than just housing, we wanted a revitalization plan that was more comprehensive in nature, that strengthened the bonds of neighborhood that were there and created economic opportunity for all. We set forth to conduct engagement that was thoughtful and meaningful, and really wanting to build a consensus around the plan recommendations. And we wanted to help empower the neighborhood residents to have a say in the direction of their ward. Of course, this all grew out of the TIF that was created at the Market at Olive development. And so we, of course, looked at part of the purpose of this plan is to make sure that we have recommendations that are fiscally responsible and try to do as much good for the Third Ward as possible with the dollars that will be coming in over time from the TIF. A little small on the screen, but we went through a three-step process. We'll go through actually those steps during the presentation tonight, but our process is built around three phases that we call explore, test, and build. Explore is taking a deep dive into the community, Test is that once we think we know just enough to be dangerous, we come up with ideas and we bounce those back off the community and get their feedback. And then we come back again with more engagement. And in the build phase, we start building the plan after we have run ideas and scenarios and concepts past the public many times. We've worked with the task force many times. So what you will see today has actually been vetted pretty extensively by the community. We worked, of course, with Brooke, which was fantastic. I think we still have quite a bit of stuff in your office, as a matter of fact. So of course, we work with the task force. We also had a subcontractor underneath us, Collabo, based in Chicago. They helped us particularly with some of the housing program suggestions. It's a bit of their specialty. And we also hired a group of community ambassadors that I think you're familiar with, but we'll touch on that again briefly. The members of the task force, just to recognize them, of course, Chairman Byron Price is here, and Vice Chair Christina Dancy, Chris Flood, Ariel Gardner, Craig Hughes, Patricia McQueen, who is here, Susan Murray, Linda Peoples-Jones, who's here, and Mayela Zambrano. They gave up a lot of time, a lot of evenings, a lot of hours spent reviewing documents, and we greatly appreciate them. And our three ambassadors, these are three residents of the Third Ward who we paid on an hourly basis to do community engagement. And so we are very proud of the work of Angela, Charlene, and Dr. Mona, as we call her. They are keenly responsible for the success of the community engagement that happened in the Third Ward. So our first phase, Explore, really involves exploring the ward and analysis of data. You have a lot more data in your package in the full plan than what I'm going to go through this evening. We could spend a lot of time just on this section, but in general, we did quite a bit of engagement with residents. We had 256 surveys that were returned to us both in person and digitally. We're pretty proud of that number. That actually came close to equaling just in the Third Ward for this survey was within about 20 to 25% of the overall surveys that were received for the entire comprehensive plan citywide. So we felt as though we reached a good number of people. This was an introductory survey just to see what people were generally interested in, what they liked about the Third Ward, what they didn't. They gave us some ideas about what was important to them, walkability, of course, secure housing, dealing with landlords one way or another, code enforcement, et cetera. We also had a mapping exercise where people could actually pinpoint on a digital map things that they liked, places where they spent time, et cetera. We had 386 visits to that website and 153 pins put on it. Again, this is just in phase one, but it gave us some idea about some clustering about where things happen. And as you'll note, a lot are along Olive Boulevard. It's pretty hard to plan for the Third Ward without taking Olive into consideration. We also took stakeholder meetings. We met with both private nonprofit folks and also department heads here at the city, including city manager, Mr. Rose, which we greatly appreciate everyone's time. We really wanted to find out the inside kind of perspective on funding needs, where people are seeing strengths and weaknesses. This led to a set of emerging themes, which is kind of the end of the process. We have a full document that we call our Summary of Understanding. It's a full document of data analysis that really summarizes this first phase that was published. It's been available to the public for many months now. You're more than welcome to look at that, of course. We can get that to you. I know that Brooke has it. But we really started focusing in on some themes about a toolkit for residents, for sure, related to housing. Really sharpening the focus. The Third Ward is a big area. And so rather than, as the very bad analogy goes, spreading the peanut butter too thin on the slice of bread, let's really focus in certain areas and make sure that we have really tasty bites in particular areas where that can do some good and spread. We really wanted to transform Olive Boulevard. we want to make sure that the residents have the opportunity to get to and across Olive. And we heard it time and time again that folks thought that Olive was really a divider in the city. And we feel as though that there's no reason why it can't be a connector. So we set forth into creating some engagement for a second phase, our test phase. Had some folks out there, yard signs, pretty happy with the opportunity to make their voices heard. You have this data in front of you. We got another 172 survey responses just in second phase. And we started asking people, based on what we heard in the terms of walkability and the need for good services and shopping, we started asking like, well, what types of things would you like to walk to? And if it's shopping, what kind of shops would you like to see? What type of housing do you think makes the most sense for the third ward? We started honing in a little bit more. We started asking what would make walking in the third ward more pleasant. It's all, a lot of residents said it's fairly walkable. We have a sidewalk network. It's maybe a little bit bumpy in a few spots, but there's not a lot to walk to. It's a more suburban pattern based on when it was developed. We would love to be able to walk 5 or 10 minutes kind of in the interior of our neighborhood and be able to do something. So we started asking some questions around that as well. Other questions around walkability and types of financial programs that might be beneficial to residents as far as housing is concerned, types of businesses. We gathered all that data. We had additional stakeholder interviews. Some of these are repeats. We went back to the people we talked to the first time and said, this is what we heard from you. Please tell us if we heard this correctly. Here's some ideas that we have now. Let's discuss those, kind of the test part. We do engagement a little differently than a lot of other firms. We often go out to where the people are. So we do pop-up engagement. We posted up in front of grocery stores and front of a laundromat Mexican restaurant complex, and we flagged people down as they walked by and asked them if they had 5 minutes. And we had engagement boards that they could interact with. We gave them cards with surveys they could fill out later. We talked about 200 residents over 4 different sessions, just going to where the people already are. And we have found that the third ward, people are working, people have families, they have things going on in the evening. They can't always come to us. So we had to go to where they were to get their feedback. We did have an open house over at the community center. And we had about 50 people come to that. We had a fun exercise where we had a bunch of ballot boxes, if you will. And for each ballot box, there was a different housing program. Here's a weatherization program. Here are home improvement loans. Here are things of that nature. We gave everyone $100,000 in play money. And we had in $10,000 bills. And we had them like, this is your budget. If you were a city council member for a day, how would you allocate these dollars towards these programs? So they allocated that, and we counted that up. We replicated that exercise online as well during the survey portion. So out of all that engagement, we started honing more ideas, and we wanted to try to build consensus in this final phase with one final push for engagement that tested an idea specifically, and that is, well, Raby Park, right in the middle of the third ward, right in an area where the housing values are a little higher, where the sidewalk network is very robust, good visibility. And we thought this might be a great spot to try the idea of what if there was a very light amount of retail service that was available to people in the third ward. And I'm a big fan of ice cream and snacks. So I thought, well, probably what would make the most sense is to have some type of cafe situation in Raby Park. That's pretty traditional for parks. And I thought, well, let's just, and I do say my boss kind of looked at me crazy, but I said, let's do a pop-up cafe in the park, if you will. Let's have hot dogs and ice cream. Let's have some live music. Let's do it on a Saturday afternoon and invite people to come. And we alerted the neighbors around. We let them know what was going on. we set up. They came over while we were setting up. Believe me, they were very interested. And then they were sending their kids over and having a good time. And the idea was, what if this was a more active park? Um, the entire day that we set up that Saturday, there were 2 people in the park the entire day while I was setting up mostly in the morning. And then our crew came later on. We probably had about 150 people overall that came to the event. We brought what we call our Engage Mobile. We rent a cargo van, and then we magnet posters, engagement boards up onto the van, and we use that as our easel. A van doesn't blow away very often, even here where there can be tornadoes. So we got an ice cream truck with some of the best ice cream you've ever had in your life, by the way. Hot dogs. We probably had about 150 people come through. We also had a kids musician come, and we even spray painted on with some chalk paint. We spray painted in the park, kind of the concept of, if there was a cafe that was about 400 square feet, this is where we think it would be. And we think that there would be an ADA accessible path that would lead you from the city sidewalk into the park to the new playground that's already going to come, that's already part of the next year's city budget, but also would walk you by the cafe. And these are some things that could happen. We have found that also a lot of folks that have been with us through this process, giving input, vocally, certainly. I think that they really appreciated this effort because, as they're standing there, they would march up and say, I have a problem with that idea. Well, let's hear it. And absolutely, let's talk about it. Well, as a matter of fact, why don't you get a bowl of ice cream and come back and let's talk about it. And we talk about for 20, 30 minutes. People thought, well, this is great. And what we found is that people have a hard time getting upset at the person who hands them a bowl of ice cream. So it works out well, but we had really good dialogue with folks. And when they found out reasons why we were suggesting certain ideas, made a lot of sense. And, certainly there wouldn't have been 100% consensus, but I think that there were a lot of folks that were open to ideas that were in front of them and appreciated some of the details that were presented. So with that was kind of our last bit of engagement, where we then finalized recommendations in the plan. There are really 4 buckets. First and foremost, the residents come first. A housing toolkit of programs to help third ward residents with their properties, whether ownership or rental. Focus the investment for maximum impact. This is kind of sharpening that focus. We have some ideas there. Connect those focus areas, kind of lens towards walkability. And then we do think that there are some enhancements to Olive that are pretty low hanging fruit, quite frankly. So just going through, you have this chart in front of you in the plan. You can look at it, but these were the results, a combination of both in-person and online to that exercise where people could budget for housing programs. And there was a very clear set of winners in this program, and that really shaped what we decided to do as far as the recommendations that we're making to you for housing programs. So we are recommending a good amount of the funding that would be made available to residents would be in the form of home repair grants. There's details in your packet, but basically it would be a matching grant program. They would be basically forgivable loans in a sense that as long as a person stays in the house where they've received the benefit, every year that they stay in the house, a certain percentage is forgiven until it's completely forgiven. We have looked at AMI at certain income qualifications, and it was heard loud and clear that folks in the third ward wanted everybody to be able to partake in these dollars. What we do think is that we're proposing a cap of $15,000 on these home repair funds. What we think might be a good solution, but this will of course be up to council, is to say to unlock $15,000 of funding, perhaps a person that makes over a certain amount, a percentage of AMI has to match that dollar for dollar, 15,000, which is not unreasonable. But a person that is a certain percentage below AMI that is of means, to have them come up with $15,000 to unlock $15,000 is probably not feasible. That probably limits them right off the bat. So perhaps they put in a lower match. Maybe that match is $5,000 to unlock 15. Smarter people than I will be able to determine that, but we feel as though that the home repair grants are going to be quite successful, and we have in the budget that we've recommended put a lot of into that. Aging in place grants, which kind of mirrors what's called a HISA grant, which is for veterans that allows them to age in place. It's a lifetime sum total grant of $6,800 that they can get through the federal government. We think people should do that, but we think that you should match the same program and do it locally, but make it available to all seniors regardless of their veteran status. So this allows them to age in place, really deals with things like wheelchair ramps, modifying kitchens and bathrooms, that sort of thing, making their house accessible to them as they get older. Path to home ownership programs, mostly down payment assistance to get people into homes. We have seen those programs work in a lot of places. The key is that this would be unlocked to third ward residents first, and then University City residents before it would be to somebody outside. So we want the people who are already in the neighborhood who are renting that want to buy. We want to let them have an opportunity to buy and provide them some assistance. Weatherization assistance, I think that's pretty clear. Fixes that can be made, sump pump, roof, eaves, gutters, etc. And then the tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance is an interesting program that was piloted in Washington, D.C. It's catching on in other places around the country where basically if a landlord owns a building, it can be a small apartment building, it can be a single family house that they're renting. But the way it works is that by ordinance within a geographic area, whenever the owner wants to sell that property, they are required by ordinance to allow their tenant to have the opportunity to purchase it at market value, at their price. Of course, that dovetails very nicely with path to home ownership tools. But what that does is that prevents rapid displacement of residents where a neighborhood is rising. Well, now I'm going to sell this rental house, and these residents are going to have to go find somewhere else to go, and we're going to bring in a whole new group of folks. And we certainly want to avoid that if at all possible. So this is a tool that's gained a lot of momentum as an anti-displacement tool. We think it would be worth your time to look at it. And there are some examples that are given in your packet. We do think that focusing on specific areas make a lot of sense. Again, it's a big geographic area. We've identified 3 areas right off the bat that we think have tremendous opportunity to create a ripple effect. That can either be conditions on the ground now, assets that are nearby, vacant land that is available to accept redevelopment. There's a combination of factors that are explained in the plan, but to run through them briefly, just for the sake of shorthand, we named this little area. We are not proposing a brand, but we call this ETSO. This would be the Etzel, Sutter, and Olive corridor over on the very east end of the third ward. It was a lot easier to type ETSO than it was to type Etzel Sutter every single time. We really are high on that area as far as the potential. You have the Metrolink right there. You know, the St. Vincent trailhead right there that takes you to Forest Park and all sorts of places. The Well U Cafe folks that came before council, they got some funding from y'all to open up. There's really an interesting little commercial potential node at Sutter and Olive. We think that this area just north of Delmar Loop, where you have the Ackert walkway that leads practically to Olive, it seems like a natural to create a pocket of interest there. Near elementary schools. It's an area that we think really has an opportunity to shine. So what we're recommending is create kind of a gateway intersection into the area. We realize this is the city limits. But we really think that creating an opportunity for people when they're coming off the trail, when they're walking from the Wellston station, we can really announce to people, you're in University City now. We like a little bit of neighborhood commercial. We have the opportunity for people to cross the street safely, calm traffic. We've heard that people running the stop sign there is pretty common. The church, of course, their parking is across the street, so getting their congregation across the street is pretty important. So we see this as a pretty low-hanging fruit effort to create a gateway into the neighborhood and set the path forward, in combination with looking at the really interesting triangle that's there at Sutter and Olive. We do see some opportunity for redevelopment there. That's a little commercial pocket just waiting to happen. And again, a place where residents within a 10-minute walk can go somewhere. They can spend a few dollars. They can take their grandkid to get an ice cream or a sandwich or something like that. So a lot of this would just be making sure that your zoning ordinance that you're working on now will allow for certain things, making some very simple, lighter, faster, cheaper improvements, and probably just a little bit of nudge from an incentive standpoint to say, this is a place where we want you to be successful. Raby Park, again, we tested a concept kind of in a light way as far as bringing in a little cafe. We think that it's centrally located and it's an otherwise pretty passive park. There's really not a lot going on there on a daily basis. So some examples, some things that we've looked at, we researched cafes all over the place. We even went to here in the St. Louis Metro, we went to different parks that have cafes in the park or beer gardens or things of that nature to see what they were doing. And lo and behold, there are a lot of people that are there spending money. So we proposed a little plan that we think can be phased in over time. Ultimately, what it would lead to would be about a 400 square foot cafe building where there could be, hot dogs, sandwiches, ice cream, coffee, that sort of thing. But someone could walk with their kid or their grandkid down the street within 5 or 10 minutes and get a snack right next to a new playground that you already have budgeted that will be, put in. Maybe there can be a story hour on weekends. You can have the library come and do a story time. We brought out a bookmobile and gave out free kids books while we were there at the event, and it was a big hit. So we think that there can be a little more activity in life that can really be a community amenity in Raby Park. And again, this is something that can be phased in. It could just be a case of we're going to have a food truck for 2 hours a week on a Saturday, and we're going to have an acoustic musician out there while they're open up and some picnic tables, and we'll see how this goes. And if people don't like it, then we don't have to do it. But if they do like it, well, we can build off of it, and eventually we can budget for bigger improvements. This concept ended up being pretty popular with residents that we talked to. And then finally, won't touch on it much, but the Mount Olive Cemetery, adjacent to the cemetery site, that 11-acre tract, it's really the largest piece of property that's available for some type of development in the Third Ward. And, we certainly know that the property has been for sale. There's been discussions on it. We think it would behoove the city to get out ahead of that and create a development scorecard that sets some criteria and parameters for what the city would like to see on that property. As a city, you do not have to put on the catcher's mitt and just whatever's thrown at you, catch it. You can go out and you can proactively state these are the things that we want to see in this development. And a lot of what people have told us that they want is just a certain intensity of development. Right there with Canton Avenue, right there, it's an opportunity to actually again create like a potentially something to walk to for people who live in that area of the Third Ward. So there's opportunity with that site. And then moving fairly quickly, we think that connecting these focus areas are important. Really maps out really well that if improvements to walkability are really focused on a particular route through the Third Ward, you can create a path that connects elementary schools, parks, these focus areas, and other assets. And if a person is on that path, every 5 to 10 minutes, they'll come across something. They'll come across something to do, whether it be a park, whether it be a new bit of retail, whether it be an elementary school. And we've also had some thinking about how it can intersect with Olive Boulevard at strategic locations. This also would double pretty nicely as an extension of the St. Vincent Greenway Trail coming from the east into the third ward and over to the Market at Olive development. A lot of this is just as you are budgeting for street maintenance, sidewalk improvements, a little prioritization, and a few different treatments, but nothing that isn't in your guidebook already. And then enhancing Olive. Again, we heard many times that people in the third ward want to be able to get across Olive. They want to get to Hammond Park. They want to get to the middle school. They want to get to the loop. They want to go places. And on foot, it's just hard to do. So we think that there are some spots where you can create some enhanced crossings that makes sense for people. We have suggested some locations, but specifically we think that some of these locations where there's a big wide 5-lane section, 2 lanes of traffic each way and a turn lane, we think that very occasionally, in a very small way, there's an opportunity to create a little pedestrian refuge and some pedestrian triggered lights that would flash only when someone needs to cross the street, that would get people across in a safe manner. And certainly from the third ward to Hammond Park is a big part of that. So we have suggested some locations where that can happen. Again, your traffic engineering department, who has seen this, but they will have some opinions. MoDOT will have some opinions as well. But we think that this would be a tremendous benefit to third ward and to the city, quite frankly. So as an implementation, we have made some recommendations that the task force has vetted and are in front of you as far as some financial considerations. Of the TIF funds that will be generated over time, of the $10 million roughly that will be generated for the neighborhood funds, there is about 7.6 or so million that are unrestricted funds, and the rest are restricted specifically to parks and stormwater. We have tried to state that very loudly for the record at every chance we get to try to clear that up. But we are recommending that of the unrestricted funds, that basically the allocation, almost 75% of that goes into the housing programs that would go to residents, that they would be able to apply for, that would benefit their daily lives, that would benefit their properties. We believe that that is why the fund, the TIF funds were created. So we are proposing that the unrestricted funds, as much as possible, go to benefit residents. We have some recommendations on the breakdown of the different programs as far as grants are concerned. And it would touch over the course of the lifespan of the TIF, it would touch several hundred households if people were applying for the maximum grants. And there would be some where they wouldn't even apply for the maximum, and those dollars could be stretched a little bit further. So as far as the unrestricted allocations, we are suggesting an upfront kind of seeding of the housing programs in year one, about 1.2 million and a bit of change. And then from there, as the increment is generated and the funds are flowing in, we would say that 90% of those unrestricted funds would go into these housing programs. Part of this, we are also saying that the city currently does not have someone to administer these programs. And we see that as a real opportunity to hire someone as part of the administration that can administer these programs, but go out into the community and let people know that these programs exist and be a resource for the 2 third ward council members to have someone that they can interact with, at meetings, go along. We really see this as someone who it would be a real part of team third ward. So we are proposing some dollars that would go into creating that position as well. We also have an emergency fund. These are all recommendations. This will be up to council, but we are suggesting that perhaps there be a fund created if there should be a need to acquire a property that has had major code enforcement issues for a long time, and there just doesn't seem to be a way to get through Usually it's that last step as you're saying, well, guess what we're getting ready to do, that gets them to move. I think you've experienced that, but a few dollars that would go to that as well. As far as the restricted funds for parks, we are leaving this somewhat open-ended. The improvements that we're proposing to Raby Park would be roughly $1 million. Could be a little less, could be a little more, depending on how fancy you would want to make the cafe building over time. But what we really see is working with Raby Park, testing that out, seeing what works, seeing what the appetite is. And if it works out well, then you have funds available for the next park to do something similar in the third ward, or go in a different direction, or you do spend it on another park and then you know exactly what can come up in a bond issue the next time. So we are not tying your hands. We have a suggestion on what to do with the first step, but we are leaving some flexibility over time for some of the funds. And then we also have a bit of an opinion about Olive. This is the different section of area of the TIF funds. We do feel as though that those crossings at Olive would be worth the investment. We also, part of the TIF structure allows for some incentives for commercial property. We think that investing 1% of those funds over time into a matching grant fund for commercial properties there at Sutter and Olive would make some sense. There are a few things that can be done with the dollars. We are leaving almost 75% of the dollars completely alone, but we do think that, again, as Olive Boulevard goes, so goes the third ward. So we have an opinion about Olive, and we are at least making a recommendation about how some of those funds might be expended to the benefit of the community. You have this in front of you, but we have proposed a 3-year, 36-month implementation schedule that covers various areas of the plan. And you can look at that certainly at your leisure, but that's the presentation I have this evening, and I would be happy to answer any questions. I know that the third ward task force members who are here would be happy. Appreciate your time and attention.
Mr. Shear, thank you very much for your presentation, and to all the members of the task force, thank you for the hours, days, and weeks of time you put in on this. When I had a chance to read through it, this was quite an impressive piece of work. Quite an impressive piece of work. So thank you to all of you for your dedication to our community. To my colleagues, unless the city manager has something to add, I'm going to open up questions. It's like Mr. Clay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Crow. And I want to echo the thanks to the task force, the leadership, former council member Price, and Ms. Dancy for your leadership in the vice chair role. This task force is, I think, been in operation, or was in operation, not just days, weeks, hours, but years. And that is not lost, I think, on anyone. So certainly appreciate your effort. The planning, the organization, all those things take time. But I think once we brought the consultant on, things really got rolling, and it was great to see your interactions with the consultant and with the community. I want to acknowledge the task force and the consultant for some very innovative community engagement techniques. I've been in this community a little over 20 years. There are those far more senior than myself, but even in talking with them, they have not seen this type of outreach, going to Aldi's, going to other places. I have not seen that as it related to either certainly nothing specific to the third ward, but not even citywide. There have been charrettes and other things, but those have been communicated through the standard mechanisms. So this did represent something different, and I am appreciative of it. So as we think about this plan, this, as I see it, is a blueprint, is a strategy. It does not get to the comments about AMI, for example. It doesn't get into a level of granularity as to how to actually implement these programs, what they would look like, qualifications and the like. And I guess this is to the city manager. The next steps look like what? We have the overall strategy, but what is the actual implementation and the granularity and the detail and the fleshing out look like?
Mayor Crowe, Councilmember Clay, the next step will, if it's acceptable to the council, is to include the plan on one of your January meetings for acceptance. Following that, it will be to start integrating portions of the strategy into the 2026 annual operating budget. Perhaps the most important one at this point is hiring an individual that can actually execute on the strategy that has been put in place.
So let me ask this as a follow-up. So the hiring of the individual, I know that was mentioned in a previous presentation. You mentioned 2026 budget and fiscal year. When would we be looking at hiring? Like the actual month, roughly, we'd be looking at hiring.
That will depend upon how quickly you as a council want to move forward with it. If you accept the plan in January, we could carve out the position and place that into this fiscal year's budget. If you are desiring, because we will start our 2026 budget process in January of 25. And so you as a council will give me direction on how quickly you want to advance in bringing the new position on board.
Thank you.
Mr. Hales.
Thank you. Thank you to the task force and for the presentation tonight. It is not often that we get a 70-page study session packet, but it was absolutely filled with great information. I have a couple of questions and I'll just bounce through them all. I'll start with the last one, which was the slide on the quarters. I'm assuming you're talking about calendar quarters versus our fiscal budget quarter.
Yeah. We tend to leave those somewhat undefined. This can all slide. If you happen to not start until, say, the second quarter is the kickoff of when this starts, everything can slide over a column and you can, move things. But we are looking at, if at all possible, first quarter of calendar year.
Okay.
That's how it's written, but things change and things can move.
No, I just wanted to clarify that because we're already into fiscal year 25. So I thought I was really intrigued by the Raby Park proposal. The one thing that I'm sure my colleagues can correct me, but Raby Park is very much a neighborhood park, not a destination park. There's not really parking around there. So I thought, adding some parking was interesting, but also the idea of utilizing our parks as destinations, because we have, Mayor would know after our 100-year park celebration, how many parks we have. We have so many neighborhood parks. And I think I would like to see, food trucks and events and bring people, give people a reason to come into our parks and build community. So I was, I don't know how that's going to end up panning out. The last question I have really gets down to, there was a section about talking with folks from MoDOT related to Olive. I'd be really interested to know who has been part of the conversation with the state and MoDOT related to Olive, because I think Olive is a bit of a tricky wicket. And it's obviously a state route. And I think it would be great if we could lean on the state and work with the state as much as we can moving forward, because everything you've talked about is absolutely dead on in terms of accessibility. It really is a kind of dividing line because it's not accessible to cross. And it should be an access point from our neighborhoods to the north and from the neighborhoods to the south to the north.
Agreed. And I'm happy to report that MoDOT is ready to partner with you on some of these ideas. They have even offered to do some temporary test scenarios on Olive. We work with a lot of dots around the country, and some are very much still stuck in 1962. And here's the manual, and we're going to move cars at X level of service. And some have really gotten very enlightened as far as we can accommodate the automobile, but not at the expense of people. And in conversations that I've had with MoDOT representatives, seems as though they have gotten a bit of the bug for doing better by pedestrians. So I think that you will find a receptive audience there. I think the key is that Olive Boulevard, we'll state this very clearly, does not have to be one continuous section from the far east end all the way to the far west end near I-70. It can have different personalities along it that respond to the land use near it. Near the market at Olive, it needs to be what it is. But as it gets closer to Heman Park, it can be different. It can be more accommodating of people on foot because it's going closer to neighborhood level amenities. So MoDOT has been incredibly responsive. There's a gentleman by the name of Sean. Yeah, Sean is his first name. It's been a long day today, but he's been very eager, and he's come to several of our community engagement events, given up his own evenings to come attend. So they're more receptive than you think.
Mr. Smotherson.
Thank you, Mayor Crowe. Let me start with the first thing is to thank you, sir, for the presentation. Thank the task force for the work that they've done for 2 years. And but what I wanted to start with is to add into Olive and just say that we are expecting MoDOT to improve and pave Olive in, is it 25 or 26? I think it's 26 because we've talked about this before. So I think that it's important to find out when that paving is going to happen and to work with MoDOT to actually see if we can actually put in place some of these crossings ideals that this plan has sooner rather than later, because they're going to repave Olive. And that is on a schedule that I'm aware of. I think that we've talked about that before. The other thing that I want to thank the task force and Yard and Company for doing is identifying something that Councilmember Clay and I agree upon in reference to Raby Park. And that is this. What we discovered about Raby Park is that we should have public parking at Raby Park, and where that should be is on that right lane side of Midland. Because if all of you that travel up and down Midland from Delmar all the way to Hanley know this to be true. It's marked one lane all the way from Delmar all the way down to Heman Park. Now, there may be a second lane, a right lane that's developed to turn right on Vernon. But then that one lane continues down Heman Park, all the way down Heman Park. So, which allows cars to park along the park. And that's what's been missing at Raby, and we never really knew that before. We never really understood it. Now we do. And so I think that that's something that the city can actually address again sooner rather than later, because there needs to be parking for residents that want to drive to Raby Park. Because I think that's one of the hindrance and one of the things that stop people from even doing that is because there is no parking for that park at all. So thank you for that. The last thing that I really wanted to ask about and get into is in this housing task force, the housing issue and the housing toolkit. And what I wanted to actually ask is, what is the measurable? What's the goal? What is the real goal that you're establishing? Because you got to understand something. I'm worried that what we're doing is just a money giveaway. And at the end of this 20 years or whatever, all that we've succeeded to do is give money away and not really solve the problem. And I'll tell you the question that I have and what brings to mind is this. There is a number there. We have 300. I'm using 300 because I've presented this to this council years ago. And that is, there's a number, 300 vacant homes and vacant lots. And nowhere in this toolkit are we addressing that. That's something that is measurable, that we know we can solve. We know those vacant houses and we know those vacant lots are affecting those neighborhoods. They are bringing property value down. One of the things, and I'm one of the original people that actually started this back in 2016. It was housing stock. How do we bring up the housing stock in Third Ward? So again, a measurable. You have 300 vacant homes and 300 vacant lots, and we're not addressing that here at all. I mean, I'm just using that as a number because what I'm worried about is how do we measure if we give Susie $15,000 and she fixes her inside flooring of her house or she fixes the plumbing? Then how do we measure that? And then how does that fit the goal that we're trying to achieve? So that's what I'm worried about. And that's why I think this housing plan needs more work and needs to address some specific issues. And I do understand that, but I do appreciate a lot of what's in the plan because it does answer some questions. It does address some needs, but especially with housing, there are a lot of questions and a lot of work that still needs to be done. So I wanted to thank everybody and just leave it at that. Thank you.
Would you like to reply?
Very much appreciate that perspective. We had gleaned fairly early on that investing these funds into acquiring lots for development was probably, there wasn't as much of an appetite for that, certainly among residents. But what we were hoping to do as the measurable is use this as an anti-displacement tool so that the success is that if the neighborhood in 10 to 15 years, the people are still here and the houses are being handed down to relatives and people are able to age in place in their homes. So I think that if you see rapid turnover in residents, and if in 10 or 15 years, you've got 30% of the residents in the Third Ward are completely different people at the expense of the people who were there. If the population increases because there's more housing stock, that's a win. We were seeding the idea that putting new housing on a block where there are other properties that are not in good condition, it's kind of chicken and the egg. Do you create a robust development environment by having vacant lots next to quality, well-kept housing? Or do you bring in the new housing first and that brings up the other housing? What we have found is that the new housing sometimes then puts bullseye on the housing on the block that isn't in as good a shape and they come down, and that can lead to displacement. So there are many, many coffees that we could have over this subject, and I don't think either direction is wrong. It really comes down to a matter of priority and making as good a use of the funds as we can. So certainly appreciate the perspective on that. And there is the opportunity to go back to the drawing board and make some adjustments if need be. Yeah.
As we move forward, a couple things I would like to ask and comment on is that I do think that the concept of the development nodes, if you will, has been around for some time. And that came even as we started the conversation about the markets at Olive. So it's intriguing to me that is still out there, that seems to be a solid way to begin this. I also think that the interesting concept about putting the money into the variety of homes is going to be how we can continue to secure additional financing for people who are wanting to locate, because we've always been told there's much more difficult to get the financing on some of the lower valued properties. So particularly in the Noves, and we've talked a long time ago about the Midland and Canton area where that was where some of the housing stock was pretty good, and then move it up. And then as that circle gets bigger and bigger. So it's kind of intriguing to watch how this sort of is moving forward. I would like to know, and not tonight, but if someone could come back to us as to what outreach has been made with the Urban League and if there's any duplication of efforts or how they partner together. I also was very pleased to see the ambassadors program. And even though I think we're probably talking maybe about one staff member, I would tell you in hiring and in execution, someone who is a good ambassador is not always a good program manager. And sometimes someone needs to go out and sell it, and then someone has to be able to say no. And seldom are those two skills go in the same person all the time. But this money is something that we'd like to invest in our community, but we have to let people know about it. And I think the ambassadors seemingly did an incredible job of getting the message out, as well as the task force members. So I'm trying to determine whether or not it's a full timer who's responsible for everything, or whether or not you even go back to the ambassadors and say, "Can we use you in the beginning, and then we'll see what happens next." That was probably a little bit more than a couple of minutes, but I wanted to at least share those thoughts and questions with you. And I think Mr. Clay has a very brief question or comment.
I know we're up against it. But I want to say a couple of things. I share Councilman Smotherson's desire to put metrics around the things that we do. I know one of them that we started out with, or at least when I became involved with Markets at Olive and the overall project, was looking at home values and on a percentage basis. One of the things that I always understood this project was meant to address is the fact that home values in the third ward fell more sharply than the other wards when there was a downturn, and rose less slowly when things improved. And so there was an effort to equalize that. So that is something that I think we can measure. When you start, you know, do you wait till the project is fully done and then you start to measure? I'm not sure others can think through that, but I think that can be one metric. I think the other potentially is leveraging additional funds. I'm not sure how much I can say about this, but I know there has been interest from a local St. Louis nonprofit in supporting the third ward and investing dollars in a variety of ways to support both residents in terms of neighborhood associations and some other things. And so that to me is another metric. How are we able to leverage the dollars that are generated from this project? But I think as we move through this, as we get more support at the administrative level, we'll be able to really dig into those metrics, because I like Councilman Smothers think that's important.
To everyone, again, thank you for coming this evening, in particular to our citizens who did an incredible job. Thank you so much for moving this forward. We stand adjourned, and we will be starting probably just a few minutes late for the regular business